Hello, welcome to Chapter 3 Podcast, the show for readers of science fiction, fantasy, and romance. This is Season 3, Episode 6, and today we have a very special guest joining us to discuss Andor, the Star Wars show on Disney+. Welcome, Hilary from Bookborn. Thanks for
Hello,
coming
thank
on.
you for having me.
Yeah, where can people find you if they're not already familiar with you?
Yeah, you can find me on YouTube at Bookborn or on Instagram at bookborn.reviews. Those are just the two main places.
Yay, awesome. Thanks for coming on. Yeah, so I thought it would be fun to talk about Andor because it's like and why it's the best Star Wars show in my opinion. What do you guys think?
It is the best Star Wars show.
I mean, this was mostly an audio medium, but I am wearing an Andor shirt, so clearly I feel very strongly about Andor being the best Star Wars TV
But
show.
I would say it's not the best Star Wars TV show. It's the only good Star
Shots fired.
Ooh. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I should say this, but like I couldn't finish The Mandalorian because I found it too boring.
You're not wrong. I mean, I like watched the first couple episodes of Mandalorian and then I left for a while and then I came back like in season 2 because my husband kept watching it and he was like, "Oh, it's a lot more interesting now." Or at the end of season 1. So I definitely skipped episodes and he's like, "You haven't missed much." And then I enjoyed season 2, but I haven't even started season 3. Because I don't feel super strongly about it. Like I enjoyed my time.
Also,
with
season
it.
3 is terrible.
Yeah.
I know. Well, Leanna didn't like season 3, and it was just like, well, then what's the point? You know?
Really? Yeah. I mean, I got halfway through season 1 and I was like, I can't do this anymore. It's like because it's Monster of the Week, but there's no ongoing like I want the character interactions, and you just don't get much of that.
So that was my problem with it too. It was too Monster of the Week for me, which some people love, but I am
Sure.
not really like a Monster of the Week person unless there is a clear overarching story, which happens in season 2 more, which is why I enjoyed season 2 so much more. But I mean, it's not like I'm like, oh, but you've got to watch season 2, Bethany. Like I don't feel that strongly about it. Like I enjoyed it.
Okay,
So, I mean,
okay.
I think I probably like The Mandalorian best of the three of us, but I'm not like an Uber fan or anything, and I hate season 3. But I think because there's Star Wars is so big all the time, and it's always like the Empire, the Rebellion. It's like these huge stories. The Skywalkers have to be involved. So it's like it was just nice to just have this little show that's like it's literally just like this local township has a problem, this local area has a problem, and then it's just like a way to just explore the Star Wars universe in a pretty low stakes way. Cute little baby alien, kind of like gruff dad character. It's like it's nice to just have that and not have this like mega crossover like legacy characters show up, lightsaber, like it's like too much all the time, and then the stories cross over all the time, and then you have to watch all the other stories to understand what's going on. So like while Mando was like a smaller thing, I was like, this isn't like brilliant writing or anything, because it's not, which is why I would say Andor is like the only like really good, well-written show, because Mando was like good for what it is. Like it's entertaining, some more Star Wars, like it has cute jokes, it has cute moments, like it's like fine for what it is. Whereas like Andor is like, oh, this is like good writing, good production, good everything.
Good acting.
Yeah.
Even the side characters.
The Mandalorian is one of those shows where like I enjoyed it. I don't feel super strongly about it. And if someone told me they loved it, it would make sense to me. Whereas there's some other Star Wars shows when people love them, I'm like, I don't understand how it's possible that you love this TV show.
Yeah.
Whereas at least The Mandalorian is quality enough that I'm like, yeah, I get it. Like if you like that, it's fine. Great. I get it.
It's Baby Yoda.
I think
just like Baby Yoda.
Yeah. I think the problem for me with it is that I want more character development. So like I see what you're saying, Leanna, and I'm fine with the low stakes, chill version of Star Wars. That sounds great. But there was one episode that I was invested in, and then we left and never saw those characters again. And I was like, I'm out. I can't.
I mean, my favorite episode is the one with Bill Burr in it. So I was like, can every episode just have Bill Burr in it?
I liked the one at the fishing village with the single mom. Like
I love that. I knew I was gonna call that it was that episode. because I was so invested in that episode.
Yes,
I was like,
yes.
I bet it's the episode with the mom. Like, that's the
That
only
was
thing
the
I remember
one.
about it.
Yeah. It
And I
totally
also
was.
I forget, I don't know her name, but I also like there's this one other female character who was kind of a recurring character, but then she got fired because
Mhm.
she said really bad stuff online.
Oh,
And
Gina
that was also,
Carano.
yeah, that was also a huge damper because I was like, oh, I liked you in the show, and now you're fired. Cool.
That is a bummer. A bummer. But we are here to talk about Andor,
Yeah,
which is truly really good. I was rewatching a bunch of episodes today to like have it fresh in my memory, and it's so well done, and the actors they hired are so good, and the writing, and like it's just
What's also like super impressive about it is that like with the track record of Disney Star Wars shows, you're already like, it's probably not going to be good because none of them are good. And then not only is it a Disney Star Wars show, but it's a prequel of a prequel, and prequels already aren't good. It's a prequel of a prequel, and you're like, there's just no way that's going to be good, right? And it's the only good one.
it's
I mean,
so
I think
good.
it's interesting because I really loved Rogue One when it came out. And
Yeah,
so
I
that
love
gave
it
me a
too.
little bit of confidence. But the other interesting thing is I feel like it's one of the only things that has a vision. I mean, Mando did, but when I compare it to Obi-Wan, which PJ, thank you in the comments for saying how I feel about Obi-Wan. In case people don't know, I hated Obi-Wan with such a passion. It's hard for me to talk about.
I
But
haven't even tried it because the reviews looked so terrible.
I can't. I just get too wound up. But the same person who did Andor did Rogue One. Like clearly they have a vision. They have a
Mhm.
story to tell. And it's very interesting to me that they said that they only want to do 2 seasons, which is something I love. When someone's like, look, this is the story there is to tell, and I'm going to tell
Mhm.
it in just the amount of time that needs to tell it. I'm not going to keep it going on. And I at least sense that when you watch Andor, like there's a story to be told and it tells it so well.
Yeah. Well, I think going back and rewatching part of it too has been interesting because knowing things that happen, there's moments of foreshadowing that aren't noticeable enough that you would pick up on it if you're watching it the first time. But watching it back, you're like, oh, yeah, that comment related to what's going to happen. Like, it's good. It's pretty rewatchable too.
Yeah, I
and I
found when I was trying to pull clips for my video on it that I was getting like re-emotional, even just like looking at the clips because they just focus on the characters so well.
Yeah.
One of my favorite moments being all the names just immediately left my head, but the sister of Mon Mothma,
Yes. Vel? Val?
Vel,
Vel.
and her girlfriend slash not girlfriend,
Mhm.
but sort of girlfriend.
Mhm.
As the names have left.
I
But
don't
I
remember.
love the symmetry of like the girlfriend telling her, we give everything to the rebellion and we take what's left. And then she turns around and says that to her sister. And the way that
Mhm.
snowballed, like there's just so many good little moments like that. Like you said, kind of like foreshadowing or whatever you want to call it, where it just develops such a good story over the entire thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
but so I
Speaking of
think
which, Mon Mothma is like iconic and her looks are just always
Amazing.
amazing.
it's also a really good match for the actress from the original movie. Like it's very believably the same person.
Yeah. I
But
agree.
so like why do you think it is that a prequel of a prequel can be so compelling?
I mean, I think because it's about people. I'm hearing like a feedback. I don't know if that's
Yeah, I hear it too.
it might be. But so I think it's because the focus is on really human relationships. I mean, you think about even how everything got going in the beginning and why everything spiraled for Cassian. It's really because of very human choices made by a couple of characters, right? That like everything kind of spiraled into what it is. And I think the focus on people and character development and how they're intertwined with this larger political narrative is what makes it work. It's less about just like cool action sequences or set pieces or like calling back to other Star Wars films. It's really about like telling this
Well, but
actual
the
story.
problem, like, usually would be, like, with a prequel is that, like, who cares because I know how this ends. So, like, I know he's gonna join the rebellion, and I know he's gonna die in Rogue One. So, like, why should I watch this? And it's like, I mean, that's true, but I feel like a show would often make, or movies would often make the mistake of like having each episode or each season, the hook for you to want to keep watching is like, oh, he's in danger. Is he going to make it? Or like, is he going to join the rebellion? Stay tuned to find out. But they
Mhm.
know that we know. And so then like that is never the question that you're wondering. That is never the hook for watching the show. It's like what makes him join the rebellion. I know he joins the rebellion, but he
But
isn't in the
why? How does
rebellion
he get
now.
there?
What pushes him over the edge, and also all the other people around whom are not legacy characters. You're like, and I also don't know what happens to them at all. So
Yeah.
like if
Yeah.
you make me care about them and you make me wonder what makes him join, it doesn't matter that I know the end.
Mhm. Well, because think about where he starts, right? He's this sort of con man playboy who like can't get his shit together. Like, I mean, that's kind of how he begins the show. And so how does he get to where we know he's going to end up? I think that's really interesting and compelling.
Yeah, I actually was going to defend the prequel thing as well. Kyle did in the comments, said something similar to what I was going to say, which is that I actually don't see Rogue One as prequely as people think it is, because yes, we knew that happened. There, it's more like taking a statement and then expanding on it, because that prequel didn't have any known characters in it other than Darth Vader and very few scenes. It was a whole new cast, uh, which is rare in prequels. Like usually prequels try to capitalize, as Kyle said, on known things, which is why I think Rogue One worked, because it took a very little tiny known thing. And so in that way, Rogue One feels less of a prequel, whereas the show Andor is clearly a prequel to Rogue One, because it has Cassian. But again, like Leanna said, it really only has Cassian. We're not following everybody. So I think that is its benefit. I do think it's, like Leanna said, very interesting that they really do not try to give you mysteries. They know you know how it ends, and I think them leaning into that is why one of the reasons it is so good, because it doesn't fall into a lot of the classic traps.
Mhm. Yeah, I can see that. I think also you get such a strong sense of what it's like to be in these different places. Because as we're moving from place, I mean, even just I was thinking about like the prison he ends up in, right? Like to me, it's so sort of visceral what that experience is like for the inmates and how that then relates to like the larger piece of what the empire is trying to accomplish. And I don't know, I think
I
that's
think
interesting.
similarly to Rogue One, like what Andor does really well again is that like usually Star Wars movies, and to a greater or lesser degree the shows as well, are these really like bird's eye, big picture, kind of like the rebellion and like the empire and who's heading it, who's making like the like top level decisions here. And they then you hear about like, well, I mean, obviously the rebellion has to have like thousands, millions of people involved. The empire has thousands, millions of people involved. And like that's just kind of like an off screen, like you have to know that that's generally happening for your current leadership people to be where they are. But like the rebellion that you see that like Luke and co are part of, like they're only part of a very small part of it, and often like the like high level part of it. And like with Rogue One, you're like, okay, but this little throwaway thing that's like, oh, the Death Star plans that we just got, that like it's like whatever, we got them, it's fine. Like how much went into freaking getting those plans. And like Andor then even further expands on all these little pieces. You're like, okay, well, the Death Star gets built, great. But like who's building it? How are they doing this? And like it's similar to all those like questions that are about when people do like World War II movies and they're like, okay, the Nazis were bad, Hitler was bad. But it's like, but the individual people who like had to make choices about like joining the army, leaving the army, staying, leaving, helping family, abandoning family. It's like that's the part of it that like Star Wars has never really been able to show in like the original saga movies. But it's that like these individual people, who joins the rebellion, what makes you join the rebellion, like uh as like a person who works for the Empire, who's just like a pencil pusher. Like what makes that person like do or not do something, you know, like all those things that had to have been true all along, but you never saw them and they were just implied. We get to see them now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways, they succeed at what the sequels failed at with Finn, which Finn was one of my favorite characters introduced in The Force Awakens. I had my own issues with Force Awakens, and that's not this, but I loved the idea of Finn as a character, but they never actually did it, right? Like they didn't actually deal with the reality of what his life would be. And I think that is in some ways why when they just let his character go and didn't lean into that might have been a reason that ultimately his arc feels hollow in the sequels. Whereas, like Leanna said, like one interesting thing about Andor is it's dealing with the messiness of the rebellion. I do think it walks a nice fine line though, because I don't like the idea that like Star Wars has to be gritty to be good, because Star Wars ultimately is a story of hope. Like the originals are very hopeful, very friendly in that way. And I don't want it to lose that. And so I think they do walk a really nice line. I actually read something, it must have been the showrunner who said it, about our main villain, again, whose name is gone. I looked this up and it's just gone. Blondie.
Oh, yeah. Dedra something.
What's her last name? I always refer to her anyway.
I have it. I'll find it. It's in my notes.
They talk about how they want you to relate to her and like kind of be on her side, even though you're not. And then all of a sudden,
totally root for her.
You do. I totally was rooting for her. And they talked about how in the last 2 episodes, they purposely turn it on you. So you see how evil she really, like what evil she is upholding, because it's shocking when she at the end is like saying, like doing terrible things. And they said they did that purposely because they wanted you to be on her side and feel for her, and then all of a sudden be reminded of the evil the Empire truly is. And I thought
so
that was
good.
it was really brilliant. And it was brilliantly done, especially with Cassian's mother's speech, which really reminded me of like the original series. And so I think they just weaved it nicely where they did get into the more gritty, they got into the more like morally gray, but they didn't remove themselves completely from what Star Wars is as a property. And so I appreciated that a lot.
Well, I think Blondie gives us too the like
Miro. I found it. Her name's Miro.
The like the how kind of like mundane evil is, that it's not just Darth Vader's walking around choking people, you know, it's bureaucrats upholding evil. And that like Vader was only Vader because of all of those people in suits that follow him and agree to go with his plans and agree to go, like we're like, oh, the dark side, the Sith Lords, they're the evil ones. It's like, well, they're like 2 people. There are millions of people that are saying, sir, yes, sir, to the atrocities they want to commit. And she's one of them. And she's good at it. So, like, lean in, girl. We stand.
Well, yeah. Well, and I think that's the thing, is because you're seeing the inner workings of this very petty, corrupt bureaucracy, and she's trying to actually do the job she's supposed to do. And so you want to get behind that, except the job she's supposed to do is terrible. And then at the same time,
well, but the people who are bad at the job aren't bad at it because they're trying to like prevent the Empire from doing harm. They're not like, oh, I'm gonna.
They're in it for themselves. They're lazy and they're just like, they don't care that much. But then you have like Cyril, the dude who like
Karn
is like, like cannot let this go. He's like a dog with a bone. Cannot let Cassian's things go. And also, I've got to say, I love his mom. I think she's hilarious.
The Fran Drescher voice drove me.
Oh my god, she's totally like a New York Jewish or Italian mom. Is like, and I just got such a kick out of the way that her character interaction.
Karn is so brilliantly written, and Karn is one of the characters that I think best shows how well they use their time on Andor. It's something I complained a lot about some recent adaptations and shows, is like how long these episodes are, and they don't ever deserve to be that long. Like they don't use their time wisely. And one thing about Andor is it uses every moment to either forward a character or a plot or a theme. And with Karn specifically, like every scene Karn is in, you get the picture of him. Like that first scene is one of my favorites, where he's with his supervisor, and the supervisor is like, let me get this straight. Let me tell you what I think happened. But Karn is just like, yes, I've edited my uniform to be tucked in on the sides.
Okay, but I was gonna bring up that
be...
first scene because I was so mad. Well, not mad because like the show was great, but like first episode, you know what? I'm like, oh, I'm excited for the rest of the show, and I was really hoping his boss from that first scene was like a gonna be a recurring character because his boss reminded me so much of Sandan Glokta, and I was like, if Glokta was in the Star Wars universe, that would be him. That's what he would be saying.
That's totally true.
It was this juxtaposition of like the pragmatic leader who actually can have wisdom about the situation, and Karn, who is such like a straightforward like A to B thinker. And the way they developed that, and the way they showed him like talking to his troops, and he like can't say anything, and it's like really awkward. He does not know how to rally a troop at all. It's all just like so evocative of who this character is. Like I knew who he was immediately. And it's such excellent storytelling when I guess they showed so much. They did not just tell you. They really showed you who the people are, and it's one of my favorite aspects.
Yeah.
Well, even then when Cassian like joined...
saying, sorry, this comment is saying he was the Star Wars Dwight Schrute, which
100%.
100%.
Yes.
So like when Cassian first, you know, gets his taste of joining the rebellion, right? And he's helping with the mission to destroy the payroll, right? Or to steal the payroll. But when he like first like meets the crew, and the way that we're shown, like again in like the original Star Wars films, it's just kind of like a wash of orange uniforms of goodness. Like that's just the rebellion. Everyone in orange, good guys. Whereas here we saw these like very individual people who each had an individual reason for being there and an individual attitude towards what they are doing and towards the Empire and towards like the mission itself and towards Cassian. And so when Cassian's like, why should I join? And there's like no clear mission statement here that like what they could like, we all agree that this is what we feel about the rebellion and the Empire. And like, you've got the guy with his like magnum opus, like, you know, here's like my musings on the philosophy of rebellion, who's like very sweet and very earnest, very naive. And it's almost like that original Star Wars feeling of like good versus evil. And it's like kind of played for laughs almost, right? Because even just now we're kind of chuckling. And yet he is the one who like dies so tragically. And it is his words. And it is that idea that you're like, as naive as that is, if that's not what we're fighting for, then what are we fighting for? Like that is actually what kind of like starts the avalanche in Cassian's mind, you know, like the first pebble or whatever. It's not like he's insta converted, but
yeah, well, he passes the manifesto on in his death to Cassian. Yeah, absolutely. There's a comment about saying the costume department did a phenomenal job with Miro's outfit, so reminiscent of Nazi clothing, which matched her personality well in the last episodes. I agree, and I think the costuming just in general on the show was so
well. The original
good.
Star Wars films also coded all the Empire as like Nazis,
right,
like with the uniform. So it was also just like very. It felt very like this is what Star Wars looks like. Like it was matching the aesthetic of like that era of Star Wars.
Yeah.
I need to say one thing that always distracts me, and it distracted me a lot in Andor, is you have like the blue and red squares marking rank, but what do they mean? Do you ever think, like, I just got so distracted at like,
someone
so
probably knows.
Someone knows, right?
There's probably a wiki article somewhere.
Email me. DM me. I'd like to know, because it did distract me. I was like, there's so many combinations. Can someone tell me what it means? But no, I do think it's good. I have said before that Karn's little outfit with his like fake tie.
The fake tie.
I love that so much. I would wear it today, now. Just like someone make it for me.
I love it. I'm a huge fan of all the like Coruscant outfits. I'm just like, oh, it's so, and the way they do like the designing of inside their house, Mon Mothma's house, and like the framing through the doorways. I'm always just like, oh, it's so beautiful.
Cassian is not a fashionista.
No.
It would be really immersion breaking if he was.
It would. It's true. He wears appropriately weathered and dirty clothing. So.
Except for when he's clean and in a matching uniform with everybody else as a prisoner trying to build the Death Star.
Yeah, ironic.
So those prisoner episodes are probably some of the best episodes of the entire season.
Not least because Andy Serkis is in them.
Yeah.
Someone,
He's so
okay.
good.
Someone I know in my personal life was like, yeah, that was really good. I just wish Andy Serkis wasn't in it. And I was like, what?
What?
What? Like, there are
What?
people out here who think that he was so
Do they also
perfect in
hate
that
Cass
role.
on Shadow and
Oh.
Bone? Is it the same person?
Probably.
I don't believe so. Maybe I should check. Andy Serkis, he just did a phenomenal job in that role.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
And even for how
chills.
limited a time we see that character,
Incredible.
he has an entire character arc that is
Yes.
like told within the few episodes he's in.
It's so good.
And that's the episode that has huge rewatchability, because when I rewatched that and realized he was giving Cassian's speech when he knew he would not escape, like he already knew at that point that there was no escape for him, then he's giving that speech, makes the rewatch almost more emotional than the original watch of that episode.
Oh, I always find the
which-
rewatch
yeah.
of anything that made me emotional worse the second time, because in addition to being emotional in the scene that's emotional, I am preemptively emotional because I know it's about to happen. I'm already pre-crying.
Yeah, it was really just so well done. And I had talked about this before, but I was watching this really close to watching Rings of Power, and I don't want to like say rude things just about that anymore because I've done a lot. But what really struck me about that episode is he says, "I can't swim." And it's just like such a bomb drop. It is such an emotional moment, but
Oh my
out of
God.
context, "I can't swim" doesn't mean anything. And it highlighted for me that like you don't need to like go overboard and try to have fancy words and dress it up and be poetic. The poetry comes in the emotion behind it. And like we had 4 episodes to get to the point where a character saying "I can't swim" is just gut wrenching.
Mhm.
Plus
Yeah.
Andy Serkis delivering it.
Oh, yeah.
Does
He's
help.
just delivering it. Yeah, I
He's-
mean,
he's so talented. Yeah, I just thought a lot of the performances in the show were really excellent. And I gotta compare it honestly, because this was my feeling watching the first half of The Mandalorian. The main actors did a good job, but a lot of the side characters or like the random people that didn't show up again, sometimes were not very good. And I just felt like that was not an issue I had. Because that kept pulling me out of the story too, where it didn't feel immersive. That was part of my problem with The Mandalorian. Whereas this, I felt like was very immersive, where I felt like the people were believable, that they were, like living or doing whatever it is that they're doing on the show.
Well, I mean, none of these characters, or none of these actors were hired to be like the character that's in this one episode. I mean, like maybe
Right.
they are only in one episode because like they die or something, or Cassian's only there for a second. But you know what I mean? It's like I wasn't hired to be for like the like isolated arc of episode 3. It's like
Right.
this ongoing story that everyone is like connected and part of.
Yeah, which helps.
yeah, the acting I think was, top notch. I was connected to every character. Like I loved them all so much. And that is a change from, like Obi-Wan's acting, other than
Ewan
oh my gosh.
McGregor.
Thank you. He's like one of my favorite people. I think my brain is dead tonight on names.
I get it. It happens.
Ian McGregor, who acts the heck out of everything, of course. I love him. But other than that, it was pretty sparse. it was pretty sparse. And so I think that was also, it's hard not to, because I watched them, they came so close together. And I didn't watch Andor until I think 3 or 4 episodes were out. Because Obi-Wan was so bad. I said I was never going to watch a Star Wars show again, because I just thought,
we got
no.
you.
I know they pull and then like enough people, like I had like so many people being like, okay, but you have to watch Andor. I was like, fine. But all the characters just delivered such emotional performances from top to bottom, and that's what really sold it.
But to what you just said also, like, is like painful that like for multiple reasons, it's not only one reason, that it got very low viewership, at least to begin with. I don't know if that's changed now, like over time with all the positive reviews that have come out, if like people have gone back to watch it. But like week to week, like it was one of the worst performing shows on Disney Plus. And like I think there's many reasons for that, but not least of them is that so many bad Star Wars shows had come out that there were many, bookworms out there who were like, I've had it. I'm not gonna try another one. And so it's like it's being punished for like other bad shows existing when it itself has done nothing wrong, which is a shame. But then it's also the fact that the legacy characters aren't in it. And people are like, I don't know who Cassian is, and it's like
I I don't care about that. As long as you're telling me a good story that feels like it's legitimately part of this universe, I don't care if it's got legacy characters.
Yeah, and I think that is the biggest rub for me is Obi-Wan used as stuffed as many legacy characters as they could in that show, whether it was justified or not. And spoiler alert, it was not justified, even within the lore. Okay, I can't get any more mad about this. I gotta let it go. But like every time I talk about it, and but Disney, as far as Disney Plus knows, at recent numbers, that's what they should do. They should make garbage referential shows because that's what gets money and views, whether or not it has lasting integrity. Whereas, like, to me, Andor is lasting. Like, I would watch it again. I want, when my kids are old enough to view more Star Wars stuff, like, I'd show them Andor and be like, well, you have to watch it. It is, for me, part of the Star Wars canon in a way that, even though I enjoyed Mandalorian, it is not a part of the canon, like, in the way that I'm like, you have to watch this to understand Star Wars. But for me, Andor feels that way. Like, I know you don't, but I love it so much. It feels a part of the system, if that makes sense, in a way that the other shows haven't.
Yeah, I agree. Well, and Leanna talked me into watching it, which seems to be true for a lot of shows. Yeah. Oh, I haven't told you. You know what else I'm watching?
House of the Dragon?
Yeah.
Yes!
It is very good.
I feel like I know House of the Dragon without having watched it.
I did tell you basically every episode.
You know, so I never watched the Game of Thrones show because I was just like, this seems like a lot. And Leanna like kept pushing me to watch House of the Dragon. So I was finally like telling my husband, I was like, let's just try it. And so
but it's kind of funny that I'm talking to you guys about Andor because I have like frequently referred to Andor as the Game of Thrones of Star Wars because it is the most like mature and political and like grand in scope and being like very adult, and it's like, you know, messy gray, you know, kind of
much
it's not
gritty,
for kids.
though.
Yeah. I don't know, Bethany, what your history with Star Wars is, but like I for sure know that I am a way bigger Star Wars fan in general than Leanna. Like, I think I feel strongly about Star Wars in a way that Leanna can't fathom because so I don't know where you fall on that, Bethany. That would actually be interesting for me.
Yeah, no, I've been a Star Wars fan for a really long time. However, I think I'm like an unusual part of the fandom that is like usually fairly happy even if I have criticisms. Like I'm not like super critical of although I'll be critical of The Mandalorian because I thought it was boring,
you didn't watch it.
I watched like half of it.
You gave up, I mean.
I gave up on it. But like the movies and stuff, like even though I have criticisms of them, like I still enjoyed them. I don't hate the new movies. So but yeah, no, I've been watching Star Wars since I was
So you're like a good fan. I try to be a good fan. I actually am a huge prequel apologist. So I am there with you in that way. I will apologize for the prequels all the time. But the sequels I did struggle with. So I think that was the hard thing. Like I struggled with the sequels, and then Mandalorian was fine. And then Obi-Wan came out and it was just like, what are we doing? Like what?
But like Obi-Wan didn't have to be that way because like we just saw that like Cassian Andor's fate is known. That can't be rewritten. And yet you can write this amazing show about him. And like, so Obi-Wan, we know, is in the desert living near Luke. Like that is unchangeable. So like part of me is like, okay, well, so then you can't write a show. But if you're gonna write a show, you know, there is a way to do that. And Ewan McGregor is a very good actor. So if you did a very introspective, like him just dealing with the grief of having lost Anakin, his like dearest friend, somebody that he really trusted, like there's so much like character story to tell with that would be a very slow, introspective, not action packed, not legacy character busting. Like it would be a very mature show in the way that Andor is a very mature show. So like if they weren't willing to do that, well then you get what you get. But.
So Obi-Wan, I say that all the time, could have been so good. There's one scene in Obi-Wan that I actually sincerely loved, which is when Owen is basically telling Obi-Wan to like get the F out. Like we have Luke now. He doesn't need to be a part of you anymore. I don't want to deal with that. It was so well acted. I'm like, if that was just the show, like he's there and he wants to look over Luke, but Owen has said, get out. And then they allow Obi-Wan to just go do other stuff. It wouldn't be very canon breaking. And I was just like, I could have watched a whole season of him just like sadly cutting sushi and dealing with like what just happened. And, you know, seeing the story of how he got from there to Ben,
Yeah.
and what
Well, also
happened.
losing Anakin, and also then because he's no longer like, forget Anakin, his whole life was being a Jedi Knight, and like that
Yes.
was like his like
Yeah.
job, his
The
life, his
Order.
calling. And so then now not only has he lost Anakin, he's lost his entire raison d'etre. So like just like there would be so much character work to do with that,
Oh, yeah.
but
Yeah.
it would have to be a smaller, narrower story.
And it could have been tragic too, because let's say it's 2 seasons or whatever, and it has to basically end with him deciding to be a hermit. Like, that has to be the ending. The ending is,
Yeah.
like, giving up everything, and that could be, like, an interesting tragedy to
Or
explore.
it doesn't even have to be tragic,
Well,
because like when we meet Ben in Star Wars, he seems pretty at peace with like this being his life.
Yeah.
And so then after like going through the like emotional work of like coming to terms with what he's lost, both personally and like in terms of the people that he's lost and everything, if he finally finds some peace and is willing to just like, okay, well then I've like fought my demons and I've made peace with that, and I'm just gonna like live on for like the next generation and do what I can for them, and it's fine, it's for them now, like my time has
mhm.
passed, I'll be here when they need me, and just be at peace with them. That's the Ben we meet in A New Hope.
Well, and one thing that's interesting is if you consider, which I think you're supposed to, the new Star Wars books and everything as canon, which I haven't read a lot of them yet, but I'm starting this year to try to get into some of them. There's a short story collection that has a story about him that suggests that he was originally there to try to look after Luke and protect him. And then Luke's aunt and uncle basically said, "We don't want you around him. We think you're a bad influence. Stay away." But he still stayed on the planet so that he was there in case of an emergency, which
Yeah, I
that's
mean, that's what
interesting too.
they tried to do that, right? And that was the
Mhm.
best part of the TV show. And
Mm,
then they threw in every possible fan service moment possible, and it
yeah.
doesn't make sense. And anyway, this isn't about Obi-Wan, it's about why Andor's so good. And it's because Andor understood that
It's because
concept.
Andor didn't do that.
Yeah. Andor was so good. Well, like another thing I want to talk about that I think is interesting with Andor is the whole family dynamic of Mon Mothma and her husband
Mhm.
and their fraught relationship and their very teenage daughter.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, they're so like they have not a great relationship, and she's trying to hold it together to support this rebellion that they have no idea what's going on. It's just
Well, also Stellan Skarsgård's character, whose name also escapes me, but he was like a really interesting piece of rebellion, and our like he's our path into it, for
yeah,
Cassian. But like his attitude towards the rebellion, and he's like one of those like he could be in Game of Thrones, he could be in an Abercrombie book where it's like, why are you doing what you're doing? And it's like for good, but like the way you'll do it is like, well, the ends justify the means, and like
right.
but
Luthen
it's
had some
not.
that's his character name's Luthen.
Luthen,
I have
Luthen,
the
yeah.
list up just so I can like
That's useful. Yes, I tried
um
to take some notes.
Luthen had some of the best scenes also. When he's telling that one like mole in the when the mole's like trying to get out, he's like, I got a family now. And he's like, too bad. Like
Mhm,
that's too bad for you. And then also when he talks to Saw Gerrera, and
mhm.
basically they come up to the purpose of like, we'll call it war. Like, yeah, we're gonna sacrifice them. I'm not gonna think twice
Yeah,
about it. That's the
yeah.
price. Those are some
It's
like very powerful moments.
it's wild. Well, and even just I think he's such an interesting character. I love the scene where you first see him on his ship changing back into the character he
Mm.
plays in Coruscant of like putting on the wig and putting on the clothes and moving changing his body movements. And I just think it's so interesting to see the sort of two-faced piece of who he portrays.
Well, it's also, I
Yeah.
feel like other stories would have you like where Cassian might doubt him, but he was always going to have Cassian's back in the end, and it's like he definitely doesn't. And the way
No.
that it's shown, where it's like you kind of root for Cassian to join the rebellion, and you kind of are like, well, these are the good guys, and like you should join it. But then you're like, Cassian's not wrong for being wary of doing this. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the theme of the whole show is sacrifice, right? It's what people are going to sacrifice for what they believe in, and it's sacrificing relationships and your life and your beliefs, and it's such an interesting theme. And going back to the question you asked, Bethany, about the family, like it's such a good representation of that, because I really like that they showed Mon Mothma as having this fraught relationship with her family, because there, at least for me, there was this hint of like her and her husband used to get along better. They have been married for years. They kind of reminisce in one of these episodes about being young and in love and getting married. And now Mon Mothma is having to play this dual role of pretending, and she's sacrificing. She like gets in this huge fight with her husband to like off-way suspicion from her. And then in the end, this like tragedy of like, she said she wasn't going to sell out her daughter. And the last scene of the season is her selling out her daughter. And it's giving like the reality of like Mon Mothma is a very important character in the Star Wars lore, right? She is like huge for the rebellion, and like she's the one who gets it like started after the Empire is like over. And so to see that side of her, I really enjoyed that quite a bit. And it was complicated. It wasn't painting her husband, in my opinion, as like a villain. Like I agreed with Mon Mothma, but I also empathized with the husband who's like probably is feeling like he doesn't know who he's married to anymore. I don't know. I had sympathy for everyone.
And the daughter too, who would be like, I don't like, that's why she's like more and more like with her father and not wanting to have anything to do with her mother. Cause like, even if you can't pinpoint it, like you have an intuition about like, I don't trust you. I don't know you. I don't, and you can't really be open and honest with a person emotionally or even literally when you're doing that all the time, and they can sense it.
And the tension of maybe the dad is the more lenient parent and Mon Mothma isn't. And so as a teenager, you're also, when there's friction there, you're probably going to side with the person who's letting you do what you want to do. It just felt very rooted in reality. I don't know.
It really
we also get this like interesting like world building piece of like where she comes from and how marriages like are arranged there. And like
they were like 15 when they got married. Young. But that was like the norm. And it seems like maybe she regrets that and doesn't want it for her daughter, but then kind of ends up having to allow that. And I think it's interesting too that the daughter's rebellion is to like get like really into the religion of the planet they're from. I was like, yeah, it's like she really feels like a teenager.
Well, I think, that is so interesting, right? Because Mon Mothma is fighting, like she has this whole thing where like she fights publicly in small ways, so the suspicion is alleviated that she's doing anything more. And so it's hilarious that the daughter's rebellion is to actually dig in more to the Coruscant culture and dig in more. Yeah, it's just like, it was just very well done. I was very interested in that.
Yeah, same. Yeah.
Did anyone else think that the payroll heist would take more of the season, that almost the whole season would be about the payroll heist?
I don't.
Because I did. And then I was like, oh, we're done. We're doing different things.
Honestly, I was kind of glad. I think I would have gotten bored with it if it had gone on much longer. Like, I feel
I'm
like
not mad that it wasn't. I just like, when I was watching, because I didn't know what to expect. So then as we were like,
I didn't
really
either.
like, I liked that we weren't rushing it, because like other shows will be like half of an episode is something that you're like, this would have taken months to plan. Like, how is this like happening in 10 minutes? So it seemed like we were taking our time showing how complicated it is to pull off a heist like this, how many pieces have to be in place, how much you have to just trust that they're going to handle their piece of it, and the timing has to be right and all of that. So we were taking our time with it. And so I was like, are we doing that for 10 episodes? Like, I don't know what we're doing.
Yeah. No. Well, and I'm kind of glad, because I was, at least at that point, most invested. Well, it's interesting. The first time I watched it, I was way more invested in what was happening on Coruscant than what was happening on Aldhani. And I was like, okay, whatever. Like, okay. But rewatching it, I appreciated it more because I already knew these side characters, and so I cared more about them and was paying closer attention to what they were saying and how the character development was happening. So even though I didn't find it that compelling on a first watch, I did on a second watch.
That's funny. I loved the Valdani stuff. That was like when I first watched it, what I was so invested in. Yeah, I don't know. I can't remember how I felt. I do remember thinking I liked how they ended up doing like 3-3-4. Like they kind of had like mini arcs within the season. I felt like it helped it move forward. I actually, interestingly enough, found a lot of the things in the show predictable in a way that surprisingly didn't hurt my enjoyment. Like when Cassian talks to his mom, the way he talked to her, I just knew he'd never see her again. I just knew, I could tell, right, that she was going to die. And even the guy with the book, you know, that we talked about, like the really innocent guy, I had turned to my husband and said, well, he's going to be the one who dies. Like, I just know it. I know he's going to be the one who dies. And
I was gonna say, I think that that kind of goes to like why this show works, because I feel like their
Yes.
entire approach with this show was them like I feel like the mindset of writers writing sci-fi fantasy is oftentimes not the mindset of writers who are writing like a war from history or just a historical drama. Because when people are like, "Oh, you can't write prequels because you know how it ends," I'm like, "So you can't watch a story about the Tudors, the kings of England, because oh, we know how history ends." So you're like, "Look at all the movies that are about history, and they win all the like a war about or a movie about the Civil War in the United States. No one wants to watch that. We know how it ends." Like that's not the case, because like those
Mhm.
stories, like they're not about not knowing how it ends. And so then
Yeah.
like Andor like went into it is like, if this was like a real story about like, oh, the historical political upheaval of this time when there was, it's like if we were watching like during the when we had the Cold War, when you watch Cold War stories and you watch like, again, we know how it ends, we know the
Right.
USSR gets defeated, but there's really interesting Cold War stories watching all the people that are part of like espionage and all this kind of thing. And so Andor is treated like that. It's like a story that like the ending doesn't matter because this is like a historical political epic.
Yes, but this ship can't sink is the comment. Yeah, like or the Titanic, for instance. We know how that ends too.
But
No,
so like
and
because like when you said when he's talking to his mom and you know that he's not going to see her again, and it's like, yeah, most SFF is like, you know, what's going to happen? Are they going to see each other again? Whereas like a war story is like, yeah, the boy going off to war saying goodbye to his parents, you're like, you're meant to watch that scene and go, there's never going to see them again. And it's not like, oh, I saw it coming. It's like, no, you're like meant to recognize the emotional weight of this moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I extra appreciate it just because, again, I was watching a lot of shows at the time that were really emphasizing mystery. And it was such a good like reminder, like you really don't need the mystery. Like very little in this was, I mean, we didn't know how some things were going to end, obviously, but there was a lot of stuff that you knew, and they told
We
you they had
didn't
no
know Andy
problem
Serkis
telling you.
couldn't swim.
We didn't know Andy Serkis
Oh.
couldn't swim, and I am personally victimized by that
Yeah.
fact. But yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, and to your point, like it's in the way it's told. I think of Hamilton, like the novelty of the Hamilton play is that it's told in a funny and unique and different way. It's not that we don't know everything about
Hamilton,
Hamilton's
I'm
life.
not sure I've heard of
You haven't
Hamilton.
heard of that? I've never
It's
talked
a
to you
little
about
it's
that,
a
Leanna,
little
ever?
obscure.
Little off Broadway, a little niche.
A little niche thing that no one cared about and failed miserably. But yeah, it's just like such a good example of that, which is why I need it to be really popular. Like I said, I've Googled trying to figure out the numbers, but they don't release that stuff after like the first week or whatever. But
Yeah.
I hope that it has like a long lasting effect and does well, because I need it
Yeah.
to. I need it to prove the point.
So here's my question that I still have. What happened to his sister? Like the whole thing started with him trying to track down his sister, and we do get a moment with his mom saying, not looking at him in the eye while she says it, like, you need to stop looking. She's dead. There were no survivors. And I'm like, is that true, or do you know something you're not saying that you just can't know? I don't know. I have questions.
Maybe that's what season 2 is about.
Maybe that's what season 2 is about.
I have two minds about it. I think either Leanna's right, and that's what season 2 is about, or like part of me wouldn't hate if she really was dead, because I do think part of Cassian's story is that he won't let go.
Yeah.
Like he thinks he can do it. He thinks he can fix it. He thinks he can do it.
Frankly, I had forgotten that there was a sister that he was looking for.
Oh.
So it's not like I'm like, who's season 2, sister? Like when you said that, now I was like, well, maybe that's what their plan is for season 2. But I low-key did not remember that he had a sister.
Yeah, that's in the very first scene and in like the flashback scenes, which I actually quite liked the flashback scenes. At first I didn't.
I wasn't sure they were flashbacks. My family and I, when we were watching it, we were like, this is a flashback. No, this is not a flashback. This is happening right now. Wait, this is a flashback. That's Cassian? No,
It's definitely a flashback. Yeah.
Well, like we finally were like, it's definitely.
yeah.
I think someone finally said his name, or like it's finally the meeting. But until he like met her and was adopted by her, we were like, it is a flash. It's not a flashback. It is a flashback. How does this connect?
At first I worried they were spending too long on that. That was like the one thing I remember being like, are they spending too long on this? But like I really got the vision in the end, especially because I think those parts help us understand. Because in Rogue One, Cassian has this like speech to Jyn Erso, where he's like, easy for you to say, like easy for you to be whatever, but like I've been fighting in this rebellion my entire life. And I think those scenes were needed because like at the moment that we enter Andor, Cassian is not fighting for the rebellion. So to see how it started, and this is more like a brief pause in between how he feels like he was fighting for the rebellion, I do think was really good context that added like a lot of depth to that moment in Rogue One too, to realize that Cassian didn't just fight for the rebellion his entire life. Like, I don't know, for some reason that was like I really loved that character development for him.
Yeah, that's interesting. They also did some cool mirroring moments in the show, but one with the flashbacks is when they're at the end is sort of like going back and forth between these scenes of him in the spaceship being taken away by his mom, who's like going to adopt him, and him being in the spaceship being taken away by Luthen, and like the side by side shots I just thought were really interesting.
Yeah, they do a lot of that with like the way characters speak as well. Like I already said that one about Val and how she talks to her sister and her girlfriend. I loved how they constantly did that symmetry, and how I'm pretty sure like a lot of the stuff Andy Serkis said was like stuff that Cassian had said to him. So I really loved that theme. And I actually didn't notice the ship thing that you just said. So like, yeah, that like is totally the same thing though, like how they're mirroring that. I didn't even notice that one.
I noticed it when I was rewatching the episode. I was like,
so
"Oh,
cool.
that's cool." Like it was shot for shot almost like him as a kid, him as an adult, and like being taken by somebody where he doesn't have a lot of control of what's necessarily going to happen, which I think is kind of
Very cool.
No, it was good. It was a really good show. So we are at like 51 minutes. Any kind of final thoughts or topics you want to cover before we kind of do our end of show?
Well, aside from the last minute, maybe season 2 is about the sister. Do we have any like hopes or predictions for season 2?
I'm curious to see what's going to happen with the daughter. And like the possible marriage alliance thing. Like I'm very invested to see what happens with all that.
Yeah, I guess I just hope it's like the first season. Like, I mean, I hope I'm actually, the thing I'm most curious about is supposedly the showrunner only wants 2 seasons. So I am very curious to see how much, okay, let me start this sentence over. How close do we get to Rogue One?
Right.
How close to the start? Because, like Rogue One ends like right where A New Hope begins. Like they bring it like straight there. And so I'm curious if he is going to do, or the showrunner is going to do the same thing with Andor. Are we going to go right up to Rogue One, or is there going to be like space? So I am very curious.
You're curious, but do you feel like you want that to happen or that you don't want that to happen?
I think I don't want it to happen.
Yeah,
I think if I chose, oh, you're the same. Yeah, I don't want it to go straight up to Rogue One. I
think
hope that
what it makes sense, because the thing was the plans, and the plans is the start of A New Hope. So it's like it kind of literally just like it has to pretty much
be that way.
It has to, because they're already building it. So
and they all died. So like,
I mean,
the plans had to go somewhere.
Yeah.
I hope that doesn't. But I am curious. Like, I guess I'm just curious where they're going to leave Cassian as a character. Compared to where he is in Rogue One. Like I'm just really curious about how that's going to be handled.
Yeah. It's funny. It just was striking me because you were talking earlier about Mon Mothma and how she's such a big character and starting the rebellion and everything. And there's this scene where Luthen's assistant kind of asks him, Mon Mothma, are you sure she's worth it? And he's like, I guess we'll see. Which I'm just like, it's interesting, right? Like,
and that's the kind of fan service I like, right? That is like, because the moment works whether you know anything about Mon Mothma or not. But like, as someone who knows Mon Mothma, that's kind of like a good moment. You're like, she is, and we know she is, because
it's also a really realistic moment, because you look at that and you don't blame them for being skeptical about it. It's not one of those like, of course she's worth it, duh, idiot. It's like, no, like, I mean, she ended up being worth it, so yay, but like that was by no means a certainty.
Yeah,
no, I agree. And there's so many moments like that of characters doubting themselves. Like I actually really loved his assistant. Like just the way she acted and was like, you got to stop checking it. Like, and I don't know. And like all the things that were unsaid with the characters, like Mon Mothma's surprised by the payroll. She has no idea her sister was involved in that. Like, it just, all of that was just so expertly done.
I also just really enjoyed watching him play his like Coruscant persona and how like goofily different that it was, like very like Scarlet Pimpernel, where he's like, oh, I'm an idiot.
Yeah,
it really was. It was great. Yeah.
Oh, something we didn't talk about. Sorry, this is kind of random, but having just like really smart villains. I thought that was an interesting thing too. Like both Karn and Miro are very competent in their own way, and so like you actually believe they're going to apprehend Cassian, which
honestly,
really
Cassian's
enjoyed.
being kind of dumb. Like when he goes back home, and you're like, why would you know that?
Why would you do that? Yes.
Yeah.
But it does, I mean, it's believable for his character. Like you're like frustrated with it, but you're not like, this is stupid writing. You're like, this is what he would do, and I'm so mad that he's doing it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, and not only are they competent, but I think also what makes them effective villains is that they believe they're right. They have good reasons for what they're doing in their own view. They don't see themselves as villains at all. They see themselves as heroes.
Which is like watching a war historical movie.
It really was rooted in like war. And I did say that to somebody, like I actually felt I was watching a war. And the reality of what
like
even
kind
rebellion would be.
One of the things, I mean, there's a million things wrong with like the new Star Wars movies, but one of the things that like most struck me when I was watching the original Star Wars movies again, because I hadn't watched them in a long time. This wasn't recently, but like I hadn't watched them for a long time, and I had the sequels and even the prequels fresher in my brain. And my brother and I were watching just the beginning of A New Hope, and how all these conversations that the people from the Empire are having, and they're like really technical, bureaucratic conversations about like, who's going to go take care of this? Do we have the information about this? Like, what's happening with this over here? And like, it's a very like, it feels like this really competent, well-organized, like force that's unstoppable for that reason. And like, when I was a kid, I was like, I don't know what they're talking about, but they're the bad guys, and it sounds important. So like, as an adult, I was like actually following what they're saying, and I'm like, yeah, like Darth Vader, when he shows up, he isn't just like evil force. He's like, he shows up and he's like, so tell me where the plans are and tell me where this is. And he's like wanting like a debrief on what's going on. And he's just like a really like scary boss. But like they're having these like meetings where they're actually having conversations about how they're running things. And like I'm in the sequels, like it's just literally running around just like shooting stuff. And it's like, what are your plans? How are you organizing this? What's going on?
Well, and it's something that actually struck me about the prequels, actually, because we just watched the original 3 and then only the Phantom Menace with our son, because that's what we feel like he's old enough to watch. And I loved the Phantom Menace as a kid. I have to be clear, like I watched it a million times.
Too.
Yeah, I loved that movie.
I dressed up as Amidala every chance that I got.
Me too. I was obsessed with fashion. Like, let's just say a fashion revolution. But anyway, I was watching that first movie and I was like impressed by how political that movie is. Because I'm like, a lot of that must have gone over my head as a 10-year-old. Because I'm like, oh, this is like real political stuff about like sanctions and why Naboo doesn't want to be a part of the Empire. And like me as a kid is like pod racing, cool outfits, like Padme seems cool. And to the point where like I paused it and was like, to ask my son, like, do you have any idea what's going on? Like, let me try to explain this to you. So I do think that's interesting you mentioned that, Leanna, because I do think it gets lost a little bit sometimes when people think Star Wars is just like lightsabers.
But I also think that's why the original trilogy and the prequels, which have their own flaws, but I also I like the prequels. That's the thing though, is like as a kid, I watched both. And as a kid, I had no idea what Darth Vader's talking about. I had no idea what any of his like, you know, his underlings were talking about. But I did know that Luke was like, you know, fighting with a lightsaber, and that Han Solo was kind of funny, and the Wookiee was kind of silly, and like that was enough. And like when I watched the prequels, I didn't understand like this like embargo or this like trade agreement or like any of that, but I did know that like they're doing pod racing. Amidala's costumes are fire. Like they're having an important, and like from the tones of voices of the adults, you're like, ooh, this is a secret meeting where something important's happening. I bet it's, and then you're like, look at Obi-Wan's face and you're like, he seems upset about it, so this is a bad thing. You know, you're like, that's all you needed. And then you're like, ooh, lightsaber fight, and like that's fine. And the new movies are just like, you can have multiple levels. You can have like the fun action that's like for casual viewers and for kids, and the cool costumes that's for casual viewers and for kids. But you can also have that like deeper level of storytelling where it's like there is like an actual like political situation here going on that is being
Right.
discussed.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good point.
That's how old is your kid? That's
He's 8.
okay.
We showed him the original trilogy when he's 7, which I know is a little young. That's when I first watched Star Wars, and
Mhm.
I'm pretty particular. But I just really didn't want the Darth Vader thing to be spoiled. I was like so stressed about that. I was just like, I just don't want him to know that Darth Vader is Luke's dad. I
Oh.
just worry the longer I go, because there's kids in his class who watch all of it. They've seen The Mandalorian,
Oh,
which is like
wow.
crazy to me. That feels
Well,
way too violent.
Toy,
But
Wow.
Toy Story kind of
Because
spoils
I'm trying
Star
to think, because like my kids are so. My oldest is
wait,
about
what
to be
story
not.
spoils?
Toy
Star
Story
Wars?
Toy Story spoils Star Wars because
Oh.
Zurg.
Over his head. It went over his head because they don't know what that phrase is.
Yeah.
Sorry, your
They don't,
daughter's
yeah.
9?
My kid, no, my kids are my oldest. My son is 9,
Mm.
almost 9, about to be 9, and my younger kid is 6, and they're like sensitive to stuff. So I haven't tried, but I'm like trying to figure out like when is an
So I will
appropriate time
say,
to show
like,
them.
I don't think I'd show my daughter at 7. She's very sensitive to things, whereas my
Mhm.
son has never been sensitive. Like he only ironically gets upset over like embarrassing moments. Like when he watched
Oh.
Encanto and Mirabelle like tells the grandma the house is falling apart and then it's not, that like destroys him. He's like
Mhm.
so
I
embarrassed by
am your
that.
son. I read Grimdark all day, but some like awkward moment happens that's humiliating. I'm like, I can't watch this. I'm leaving the
That's
room.
He literally covers his face with a blanket. But just like a lightsaber fight. I will say, if you haven't seen the originals in a while, there's no blood. Like it's something like, because the new movies are in our head, like the lightsaber fights are very tame in the
Yeah.
original movies.
Also because
But
It's
the
not well,
lightsabers
and
like
it's like I'm
instantly
less
cauterize.
concerned, honestly, about that. They more get like nervous about like scary stuff or people in peril. Like that's more. It's like the emotional stuff. It's so yeah.
that's
Like
my
I'd let them watch lightsaber scenes. That's fine, whatever. But yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad it was a really good experience. He was floored by Darth Vader being Luke's dad. Like that like destroyed him a little bit,
Oh,
and it
see,
was
this
so
makes
worth
me want
it.
to do this.
It was so worth it. He like turned to us and was like, "That's not true. He's lying." And I was like, "Is he lying?" And like he was like so like, "Oh my gosh, so
So he
upset
was
by it."
basically
It's
Luke
so
going,
good.
no.
Yes, he was
No.
just like, absolutely not. So that
See,
was really gratifying.
when
Oh,
my
that's
brother
so
and I would
good.
play pretend Star Wars things, we didn't really have like lightsabers or anything. So we played pretend the trash compactor. So like in the laundry like room, the washer and dryer was like pretty close to the wall with like that's like the cabinet behind it. So we would sit on the floor with our feet against the washer and dryer and our backs against the cabinet, going like, "Oh, it's gonna crush us!" Like,
I will say that scene did stress my son out a little
Amazing.
bit. So that
Yeah.
would probably stress your kids out. That scene
Oh
like did
yeah.
stress him
Yeah.
out. It's
Yeah.
funny though, Lana, what we used to play is me and my friend's favorite scene is the one where Luke walks in and Leia says he's too short to be a stormtrooper. Like we played that scene so many times. I don't know why that scene was like peak comedy to us as like 7 and 8-year-olds.
You never know what's gonna hit. That's so funny. Well, that's
You never
helpful because
know.
I gotta figure out like when to do
Maybe not your
stuff.
6-year-old, but almost
Yeah.
9. I feel like it's probably okay.
I
Especially like
know.
in this case, spoilers might help of just being like, just so you know,
Mhm.
Luke and Leia and Han Solo, they are fine at the end of the
He
movie.
would
Like sometimes
probably
just
be
saying
fine
that.
with it. Then the question would be finding a time where they're not both together to do it. But
We
now
put
that I'm
my
thinking
daughter to
about it,
bed early and let my son stay up late, which meant we did have to sometimes watch the movies split.
in pieces,
Because
yeah.
he would start falling asleep and then be like, "Okay, I'm awake, I'm awake." And I'm like, "Okay, we'll just pause it for tonight and we can watch
Yeah.
it tomorrow." So we did watch them, not necessarily like all in one
Mhm.
sitting, but yeah,
Mhm.
it's hard.
Yeah. Ah, interesting. Cool. Okay, well, so we're gonna move into a part of this that's called On Our Radar. We'll talk about recent and upcoming releases in science fiction and fantasy Leanna, I don't know if you have anything this week. I have some. You'll have if you have anything to share, Hilary, you can. But if first, if y'all do appreciate the podcast, we would love it if you would take a moment to rate and review us so we can reach more listeners. And if you're interested in getting early access to episodes and exclusive bonus content with every episode, consider supporting us on Patreon. Today's bonus content for patrons, we're going to be discussing the Wired article about Brandon Sanderson. So that should be some interesting content. So links
You mean the article that I wrote?
According to some folks, we'll talk about it. But if you want to join us there, huge thanks to all of our supporting patrons, including our World Expander patrons. Stephanie, you all make what we do possible, so thank you. And I will be back with Izzy April 11th for our next episode, talking Neon Gods. And then the last Tuesday of April, me and Leanna will be back talking Blood of Elves, continuing with our Witcher read-along. So stay tuned for that. Books. I'll start with one. I have one that's like weird, but I really liked it. Feed Them Silence by Lee Mandello. It's a horror novella that is, I don't know, it's kind of strange, but I think it works. It's partly about a marriage falling apart and partly about this experimental science that links somebody's brain to the brain of a wolf, and like weird stuff happens. So
it just sounds like the realm of the Elderlings fits in Night Eyes.
but more scientific and horror-ish. So yeah, that's funny.
Someone read the realm of the Elderlings, like, what if this was possible? Make it possible.
Make it possible, and then also make it commentary on this like slowly splintering marriage of between middle-aged partners. Like, it's interesting.
I'm excited for The Book That Wouldn't Burn by Mark Lawrence. I actually have that. That's going to be my next read, and I am very excited to read it. So
nice.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that one.
That's exciting. Thank you, PJ, for the $3. We appreciate it. Another one that I really loved was Lone Women by Victor Lavelle, which actually ended up being a book of the month pick this month. It's historical fiction horror following a I can't say too much about it because it's one of those things you want to go in not knowing very much, to be honest, but it's really good. And it follows this young Black woman who is going off to start a new life in rural Montana in like the early 1900s after her parents have died in some kind of a very violent way. And she has this mysterious trunk she's taking along with her. And every time it opens, people disappear. And it's a really, really good book, but you shouldn't probably know too much more than that. So I would recommend it, though, if people are interested. I need to read
if
more
New
from
Commander went around stealing people and putting them in his suitcase.
Yeah, except with a lot more social commentary and stuff. So.
Oh, it's not exactly like Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them.
So no.
You didn't get a deep social commentary out of Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. Clearly, you guys are not watching closely.
Clearly.
I think the Niffler is a metaphor for late-stage capitalism.
That's fair.
I got that too, Lana. Really, I did.
Oh my gosh. So I don't know if anybody has anything else. I have like a list of a few other things that are coming out
Yeah,
soon.
I'm like dying that I interrupted your list. I thought you were only saying one, and so I cut in, and now I'm like, I did it all wrong.
No, you're totally good.
You have more than me.
I usually like when Leanna occasionally has them, we'll go back and forth, but like
I usually have one, if at all.
It's like, cool, I've ruined everything.
No, you have not ruined anything. It's great. Do you have anything else? And I just
No, I am boring. I don't have anything super new I feel like to talk about. What's the news?
I have a couple, but they're like 2 months out, and I need to save them for the next episode so I can be like, I have one.
Yeah, that's true. Because it's always exciting when you do. I feel like a lot of mine this month are kind of more horror than sci-fi fantasy.
Mm.
Like A House with Good Bones by T. Kingfisher is Southern Gothic horror with a haunted house story that's really interesting, but it's not super scary horror. So if you want to
Mhm.
dip your toes in the genre where something's like a little creepy, but it doesn't go that hard, that could be a good option. It's also kind of funny sometimes. And
Sounds
then
nice.
yeah, and then Chaos and Flame by Tessa Gratton and Justina Ireland is the first book in a new YA fantasy series that's pretty good. It's like political fantasy and has some interesting twists and turns to it. It's a bit slow to start, but if you once you kind of get into it, I think it's doing some cool stuff. So that's
That just
coming out
reminded
soon.
me. I did just read Dead Country by Max Gladstone, which just got
Oh,
released a few weeks ago, I think. I really enjoyed that. It's really weird. It's pretty short. It's like a novella. I guess it's a full novel. It's like 200 pages though, so it's pretty short, 250. And
For SFF readers, it's a short story.
that's nothing.
right.
That's exactly. I really ended up liking it. It was a really unique story and kind of like crazy magic. It also got like a little bit of a slow start for me, but then I really got into it. I would recommend it for people who already like Max Gladstone. I had only read This Is How You Lose the Time War. And that's like a
Oh,
controversial book. People either really
yeah,
like that or don't. And I'd be
I
like, if you
didn't.
don't like it, yeah. If you don't like that, I don't think people will like Dead Country because it's written in a very
Okay.
similar, written in a very similar way where it's
Mhm,
very out there.
mhm.
But for people who did like that book, Dead Country was very good. I enjoyed
Awesome.
it.
It's one of those ones where I was like, I see why people love this. I just don't.
I know you and
So
Leanna both don't like it. It's fine. It's fine. We all like Andor. That's the important thing.
that's truly the important thing.
And we
So
all like First Law, the truest, most important thing.
So
true
true.
story.
So
Very,
true.
very true. Accurate. So yeah, thank you, Hilary, for joining us for the episode. It was really fun to talk Andor, and join us when we're back. I'll be back April 11th to talk Neon Gods for the first of our. Me and Izzy are doing a read along for the whole. What is it? I can't think. Dark Olympus series by Katie Roberts. So if you want to join us for that, we'll be starting that. Again, this has been Chapter 3 Podcast. We're your hosts, Bethany and Leanna. You can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Chapter 3 Podcast. And you can also find us on our individual YouTube channels. And we'll be back in a couple of weeks. Episodes, bonus content will be available to patrons in the next few days. Thanks for listening.